Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masech the Shavuot Daf Yud Ches. We're going to begin on Yud Ches and Alf, about 7 or 8 lines from the top. Omer Rava. So we were learning that when it comes to a person who is having tashmish with his wife, and while he is engaged in this relation, his wife tells him, "I just became Tameya. I am now a Nida." So the din is that, of course, a person is not allowed to have tashmish while your wife is a nida, but what do you do if it's b'shas tashmish? So a person is not allowed to immediately end the tashmish because shetziyasai hanolu kibiyasai, and therefore it's necessary to wait until the aver is mace, and therefore then one could complete the leaving of being with his wife. And this is what we learned before, how it's possible that a Talmid Chacham may know certain halachos, namely the difference if he would be caught in this situation, that he should wait until his aver is mace, but he may not necessarily know all the other dinim pertaining to this, including he may know about having tashmish, not having tashmish, samach vest, etc. So Omer Rava. Everything that we've mentioned in yesterday's daf is something which you already learned. Kanisa tinina, prisha tinina. We're learning about having tashmish and also completing the tashmish. Prisha tinina diktani hayimishamish im hatahira. A person's having tashmish with his wife. The amra lo, and she says nitmesi. My mom just became a nida. Do pirish miyad. So while he has a kishui aver, if he immediately leaves his wife, then chayiv. In that situation, he's going to be chayiv, as we said, because that act is also a form of hana. Therefore, he's chayiv for that form of hana. Kanisa tinina, it says nimsa, interesting language, nimsa al shaloi, that let's say it's found dam on the beged, Tameyan, v'chayavin b'karbon, and you're chayav a carbon. So let's look in Rashi for this. Dam al hamapa. If you see, you find dam on this cloth. Shekaneach ba'achar tashmish. This was already after the act. She examined herself and she saw that she has dam nida. Tameim shneim, tumashiva. Both of them are tamei. Mishum nida. But who she's tamei because she's a nida. Who mishum boil nida. Devadi or also dam koinim beila. There's no question that she saw dam before. Obishas bilas tashmish. It was either before they had bia or during bia. But certainly he should therefore be chayiv. He should be tamei tumashiva. And both of them are chayiv to bring a carbon. So my love b'samach avesta. Well, chayra, why is it they have to bring a carbon? It must be because it was b'shaygin, it was b'shas vesta v'achnisa, and it was at the beginning of tashmish. For example, she says to him, "I'm tamei," and he is pirish b'koishi. So Omerlei Rabbi Adamar Masnel Rebel Oyomei Melech b'shloi samach vesta. Maybe it wasn't samach vesta, va'aparisha. And again, it wasn't on the Knisa, but he was chayiv on the Prisha for leaving. We already learned that din, that when it comes to Prisha, you're chayiv. So, nimsa al shalah tamein b'safik b'turim in a carbon. That we needed to teach us the other din, that if it's found on her beged, not on the mappa that she wiped herself with, then we say tamei and besafik. In that case, they're both tamei. Besafik upatum in a carbon. In that situation, they do not bring a carbon. Says Rashi, shemachalik shem ben kan. It's placed there between the wiping ben kanacha miyad lekancha leachar shah. Shemikancha miyad katani. When he says she wiped, it's immediately tamei v'chaim in carbon. But time later on, the equal memer le'achar tashmish also katana b'tum in a carbon. So it's not that she examined herself in this case right away. So therefore, if it was right away, we could assume she was already in Nida before Tashmish or during Tashmish. But if it was at a later time, then it's a suffix, and because of the suffix, we're not going to have him bring karbanos. But the reality is that when it comes to it, we may not necessarily have a raya when it comes to Knisa. How is it possible you can use that language? It's referring to that it was not Shas Samachavesta. It was Prisha. Nimsa Katani. Now, when it says Nimsa, the Nimsa is Labaster Hachi Mashma. It's Mashma after the Tashmish. Via Prisha, if the whole Chiv is on Prisha, Mikara Kipar Shle, Mikar Havi Le Yediyah. So, if we're talking about the whole Isser, is that he knew B'Shas Tashmish, it was Prisha. So then, why would it say Nimsa? Nimsa sounds like that it was only figured out after the Tashmish, not during the Tashmish. So therefore, it's hard to imagine that this is a case of Prisha. It's a case of Knisa. Amalei Rabba, Sayis, listen, Mighty Karma Rabbach, what your teacher is saying. Heichi Motzis, Heichi Motzis. How is it possible that you could establish this on Knisa? The Sanya Allah, because on this we said, Zui mitzvah saseh shemanida shachayv aleh. This is a case where you're chayiv. V'im isa mitzvah soy sasehi. Right? It says it's a mitzvah saseh. So what's this? A mitzvah saseh of doing something. So doing something is the prisha, because it's b'shas tashmish. However, if we're talking about we're saying that it was only after Tashmish, then that's a lo saseh. So the fact that it's called an aseh, it must be talking about Prisha. Armulei I tenisa chaser v'tani hachi. If you wish, you could say that's missing words, and this is how you're supposed to read it. Zui mitzvahs lo saseh shebenida shechayven aleh. And therefore, if it's a lo saseh, so therefore it could therefore be talking about it's talking about again, if we're talking about a mitzvah saseh, it's something you're supposed to do. However, it's a mitzvah loy saseh, it's something you're not supposed to do. So if you say you can just add the words loy saseh, zuhi mitzvah loy saseh shemenida shechayven aleha, which is talking about a situation where it's already afterwards. Okay. And the issue would be Kanisa. Okay, Hayim Shamish Ima Tahira. Let's say again he's having Tashmish. The Yarmulo Nitmesi, and she became a Nida, and she tells him that. Upirish Miyad Chayev. Zui Mitzvahs Aseh Shemenid B'chulu. So this is talking about what is the Mitzvahs Aseh of how to do Prisha. Okay. Says Rashi, V'imisa the Kanisari mitzvahs loisaseh he the ein kanaseh. It's not naseh, not supposed to have tashmish anymore. What you know, Omer Mar Pirish miyad chayiv. So it says if you have your aver still hard, then you're chayiv. So heichi ovid. So what is he supposed to do? So we already talked about this, and here's the Gemara. Rav Huna mishmei the Rava noitz eser siparna bekarka. You should dig all 10 fingernails into the ground. Ad shiyomos, until his aver weakens. V'tovia, and this is the v'tovia, and this is the best thing that a person can do. Says Rashi, v'ashra, praiseworthy are you. Kormizuhi hatoivaloi. Omer Rabba Zayis Amaris. This teaches us hamashamash meis barayis potter, which we've had previously. Now the Masechtas, that if a person has tashmish with his aver, which is mace, so that's not considered to be like real tashmish, and therefore you're potter. So hacha my time of potter. So why would you be potter over here while you're having tashmish with a nida? Because it was beyond your control. Like you just found out that your wife's a nida, and there's nothing else you could do. So this is the best case scenario. So he anasu. So if it's an oinus, ki parish miyad nami nifter oinasu, it's still an oinus, so you should be potter then too. Really, maybe if you had tashmish while your aver is mace, you're still chayiv. So my time a potter. So why in this case do we say you're potter? Mishum da'inasu, because it's an einis, because there's nothing else you can do, and therefore you should wait until your aver is mace, which is a better scenario, so you won't have that hana be it siyasai, and therefore by doing that, that's the best thing you can do. Ayvaha de'armet kiparish miyad amay chayiv. So why are you chayiv? Shahayu lifresh bahana mu'eta supirish bahana maruba. You should have waited for the aver to be mace, and therefore even though there is hana, that's the reason why you're chayiv, maybe by being mishamish mace barayas, but nonetheless it's hana mu'et. And therefore, if your wife is a nida, better that you should not have the hana maruba of being pirish immediately, but rather waiting until the aver is mace, and then only afterwards being pirish. If this is the case, we find this concept, as we saw before, about when a person finds out that they're tameh in the azara, so you have to go out immediately, and you have to find the closest and fastest route out, not the longer way, or else you'll be chayiv. So we see, says Rashi, chiluk being katsar v'arucha. She'im hirech v'sha potter. Interestingly enough, when it comes to nida, if you stick around, if I can speak in a maybe not the most proper tone, while you're having tashmish, she's a nida, but you wait, so then you're potter. V'im pirish b'katsara komer miyad l'havichayim, which is interesting. When it comes to the azar, it's the opposite. When it comes to the azar, you have to leave immediately to be potter. If you go the long way, you're sticking around too long, then you're chayiv. However, when it comes to nida, it's pumfaker, which is kind of interesting. In Kemasina Ruch Katsar Benida, but Anan, as we continue to Yud Chesed Beis, B'mikdash Tanan. We were talking about when a person leaves. It could have also mentioned the case of nida as well, just in the opposite direction. El mishum duloi dami. Arucha dahacha katsar dahasa v'arucha dahasam katsar dahacha. The reason why is because they're opposites, as we said. Because by the mikdash you need to go right away. By nida you need to wait. Maskav Rav Huna b'Rav Rav Nasan. So that's the question. Mi omer Abaya. Is it true that Abaya said the anusu, that this person who is having tashmish is mamish beyond its control? If that's the case, then obviously it wasn't Samach Havest, because if it was Samach Havest, you're not an Einus, because Samach Havest, you're supposed to be pirish from your wife during that time. He said you're chayiv shtayim on knisa and pirush. Pirush, as we said, if you exit the tashmish immediately, but you're also chayiv b'knisa if it's Samach Havesta. So if it's Samach Havesta, he says you're chayiv shtayim. So if you're chayiv shtayim, how can you tell me? Therefore, must be has case of Samach Havesta. Samach Havesta is not an einus. So Kiyam or the Abayam, Ba'al Mi'inmar. You're right. But when he said this, he was talking in general, in normal terms. It says Rashi Dechayiv Shtayim Ba'al Mi'inmar. V'lava Masnisan. He's not talking about our Mishnah. Because the Masnisan, Kivan de Mafli Ben Pirish Be'aver Mace Le Pirish Be'koishi. Since we make this whole distinction, is B'shloi Samach Havesta Askinan. It's only Shaloi Samach Havesta. The Omer Abayel El Chayiv Shtayim Ba'alma Itmar. He was just in general. Milsa Ba'pi Nafsha, not connected to the Mishnah. V'achi Itmar. Tamashamashim HaTahira B'samach Lavesta and V'shagag B'yachleinu Le'boyel. The Shagag said, no, you know what? I could be boil before she becomes a nida. The Amrul and Itmeisi Chayiv Shtayim. In that case, you're chayiv because you shouldn't have taken that chance. Okay. So Ba'al Mi'inmar. Bomini Rabbi Yonasan bar Yosi ben Luknia Merav Shimon ben Yosi ben Luknia. Azhar Loboil Nida Manayim and Atira. Where do we find an azhara of having tashmish with a woman who's a nida? So shakukala pasak bay azhara boil nida. So he said, what do you mean? He took a clod of dirt and he threw it toward him, as though to say, like, this is kind of obvious, right? Azhara boil nida ve'el isha benidas tu masal sikrav. It says beferish in the Torah. Like, what are you doing? It's like throwing something at him. How can you ask such a kasha? It's obvious. We know this is a portion of pasuk. Ella, the question is, azhara l'mishamish ima tahira. How do we find azhara? Of course, you can't have tashmish with your wife who's a nida. How do we know that even if you're mishamish with a woman who's tahara, the amrulo, and she says nitmesi, b'shas tashmish, do nifresh miyad, that you have to wait until your aver becomes mace. Menon. So it says tihi nidas olav, that the nida, the status of nida is upon him, which means that fil b'shas nidasa tehei olav. Even at the time that she's a nida, he should stay there. Tehei olav, it should be on him. It's interesting language. That when you find out that she is a nida, then you should be tehei olav. That you should continue being intimate with her until your aver is mace. So ashkachan aseh. So this is an aseh of how a person should go about the prisha. Losa se manolan. How do we know the losa se of not having tashmish there b'shas vesta? So Amar Papa Amar Kro lo nami lo sifraishu. So it means that also means lo tifresh. D'chsev ha'oimrim karvalecha. Those who come close to you, al tigash me, don't come close to me. Ki kadash ticha. Okay. Fine. Tanoban. These hartim es b'nei Yisrael b'tumasam. So what do we learn from this pasuk? So Amar Rabbi Yishai mikan azhara l'bnei Yisrael shepirshu min shesem somach avestan. We went out from this pasuk that you should separate from your wife, not even if she's tamei, but at the time of her onah. When there's a samach avestan, when there's a chance, of course, based on her previous cycles, that she may become a nida at this time. V'kama samaraba onah. What onah? So Masechtas Nida, which we'll get to soon, maybe in a couple of years actually. But first, o yom o laila, either a day or a night, like a 12-hour period. Investa b'yoyim, if she normally sees during this day, yifresh kol yoyim. Vesta b'laila, yifresh kol laila. It's basically a 12-hour period. Rabbi Yocham Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai kol shein parish meisho samach avesta. If you're not parish from your wife samach avesta, if you'll have a little banim kivnei aroin, even if you have great kids, mason, they're gonna die. D'chsev dishartem es b'nei Yisrael b'tumasam. You have to be very careful when it comes to these dinim of even samach avestan. V'hadova b'nidasa. The samach lei. Right after that, it says achri mais. So it teaches you that even if you have great kids, but if you're having tashmish b'shas vesta, that could be a problem. On the other hand, if you're meticulous in the dinim of nida and you're separated from your wife, even the samach avesta, have an abundance of zacharim. You're going to have boys. So we say to make a difference between a tamei and a tahar. So a person is lahavdil and he makes a separation and doesn't have tashmish at the wrong times, samach avesta, then he'll have boys. Rabbi Shimon Levi, you're going to have children who are going to be so great that they're going to be able to pass and they'll lahavdil lahoidos to teach. Which is not such a simple thing back then, but a person was able to make Havdalah on a cup of wine, even though there was a time, as Gemara Bracha says, that we say Atachar Antanu because we can get wine. So if you're meticulous to get wine, so have banim zacharim, we'll have boys. So she's Havdalah. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Omer Banim Roin Muhara. You also have children who will fit to Paskin. Dechsev Havdul Hoydos. Amar Rabbi Yamin Bar Yefes Omer Rabbi Elazar Kol Mekadosh is Atzma B'Shas Tashmish. Anyone who's Mekadosh, says Rashi, Derech Snius. Someone who acts modestly during Tashmish, Havdul Banim Zacharim. Shneimar V'Skidashtem V'Yisim Kedaishim should be holy. The Samachli Isha Kisazriya. Okay, we'll stop there. Let's see if there's a question. Question 14. Man nilman mesmichas mikrois beschar kol parish miishto samach avesta. So either you'll have bonim zacharim or you'll have children who will be royal hoyra. Okay, that's question 14. And for some reason I did not mark that down. Okay, let's do that here. Kol parish miisha. Okay. That's question 14. TA 12. Ma loim de masmichas de lahavde bin kodesh uven a choyel, lahavde bin a tameh bin a tar, v'samach le kisha isha kisazriya. I got it wrong, which is pretty bad, but I obviously got something confused. So the answer is kol amavde le yayin v'motzi Shabbos havil banim zacharim. I probably being kodesh or choil, right? So I probably got confused between that and again tashmish besnius, etc. So that's TA 12. That's a very frustrating type of way to get a question wrong. That's kol hamavdil al hayayin b'mitzvah shabbos. It says lahavdil bein kodesh uvein a choil, which of course is the weekday. So that the question clearly talks about Havdalah, right? So that's what it says. L'havdalah bein kodesh u'choil. Okay, so sometimes you make some mistakes. That was a hard question to get wrong. Question TB 13. Here's 7 years later, and I'm not making a mistake twice. That lightning does not strike twice. I wasn't going to get that question wrong. TB 13. Adkan.